The locked box. The mic was heavier than I expected. That was the first thing I noticed when I picked it up from the podium, the solid weight of it in my palm, and the faint whine of feedback that rippled through the ballroom before settling into silence. 200 people sat at round tables draped in white linen, their wine glasses catching the light from the chandeliers overhead, and the air smelled like vanilla candles, the kind that cost too much and burned too sweet. Behind me, a banner stretched across the back wall in gold and navy letters. Family Man of the Year, Earl Beckett. My father sat at the head table. He was smiling, the smile he had been wearing all evening, the wide and warm one that crinkled his eyes in a way that looked practiced if you had watched it long enough. My mother sat beside him with both hands wrapped around a linen napkin in her lap, gripping it like she was holding something down. I looked at him. He looked at me. 200 people waited. "Thank you, Dad," I said. "You said family is everything." I let the silence sit there for a moment, just long enough for the room to settle into it. "I want to tell you about the family you built." In my left hand, pressed flat against the side of the podium where the audience could not see it, I held a piece of paper so old that the edges had turned the color of weak tea. I had been carrying it for 19 years. I had never shown it to anyone except one person, and she was 3,000 miles away right now, probably sitting in her kitchen with the lights on, waiting for a phone call I had promised to make. "I don't have a son," I said. The room went still, the particular kind of still that happens when 200 people stop breathing at exactly the same time, when forks freeze between plate and mouth and someone's water glass hits the table a little too hard. My father's smile did something I had never seen it do. It stayed in place, but everything behind it emptied out. 3 weeks earlier, I had been sitting on the floor of a converted Victorian house in Asheville, North Carolina, across from a girl named Bree who was 16 years old and 5 months pregnant and had shown up that afternoon with everything she owned stuffed into a backpack and a garbage bag. Her stepmother had changed the locks while she was at school. She had taken the bus to Hope Anchor because someone at the ER told her we existed. I did not ask her what happened. I asked her when she ate last. That was how it worked at the shelter. Food first, then a bed, then conversation whenever she was ready. Hope Anchor had 8 beds, a kitchen that smelled permanently of instant oatmeal and donated coffee, and a waiting list that made me sick to think about. The posters on the walls were framed in mismatched frames from Goodwill. My desk was a folding table covered in files and sticky notes, and one of the sticky notes said landlord called, "Rent due in my own handwriting from a week ago." We were $200,000 short of next year's operating budget, and I had run out of grant applications to submit. I drove home that evening to my apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like someone else's cooking. On the bookshelf in the living room, wedged between a dog-eared copy of What to Expect that I had never thrown away, and a collection of Mary Oliver poems that June had given me for my 30th birthday, there was a wooden box the size of a paperback. It had a brass lock on the front, and the key to that lock hung on the silver chain I wore around my neck, the chain I never took off, the chain people probably thought was just a necklace. I had not opened that box in front of another person in 19 years. I had not opened it in front of myself in almost 3, but the contents were as clear to me as the lines on my own palm, the way the contents of a locked room are always clear to the person who locked it. You remember because you locked it. You remember because you are the only one who ever will. The phone call. The phone rang on a Saturday morning while I was washing the dishes from the night before. A Portland number. I did not recognize it, but the Oregon area code alone was enough to make me turn off the faucet and stand there with wet hands, staring at the screen. I picked up. "Haley? It's Tara, your sister." Her voice was higher than the one I carried in my head. Or maybe that voice belonged to an 11-year-old girl and this was the voice of a woman who was 30. I wiped my hands on my jeans and leaned against the counter. "I know who you are, Tara. I wasn't sure you'd pick up. I got your number from, well, it took a while. You're hard to find. That was the idea." She laughed, a little too quickly. The kind of laugh that fills a silence because the silence is too uncomfortable to sit in. Then she told me. Dad was getting an award from the Portland Business Council. Family Man of the Year. 200 people, black tie, the Hilton Ballroom. His company had nominated him. Mom wanted the whole family there. He wants you there, Tara said. They both do. And they want to meet your son. My hand tightened around the phone. Your son. They believed there was a boy. 19 years of silence. 19 years without a single phone call or letter or email. And they had constructed a version of my life in which the baby I had been carrying when they put my clothes in garbage bags had grown into a young man they could meet at a gala. Dad wrote the most beautiful nomination letter, Tara went on, her voice bright and fast like she was trying to keep the conversation moving before I could steer it somewhere she did not want to go. He mentioned both of us. My 2 daughters are my greatest achievement. I'll bring you a copy when you get here. I said nothing. I just think it'd be nice, she said, quieter now. For once, we could all be in the same room and just be a family, even if it's just for one night. I told her I would think about it. I hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time with the water still dripping in the sink. They wanted to meet my son. 5 words that blew open a door I had spent 19 years sealing shut. The FedEx arrived on Monday morning. Overnight delivery, the kind that costs $40 and comes with a signature requirement. The return address, said Beckett, Portland. Or, in my mother's handwriting. I signed for it and carried it to the kitchen table and sat there looking at it for a while before I pulled the cardboard tab. It made that clean, sharp sound that FedEx boxes make, like ripping a bandage. Inside was a white envelope, the thick kind banks use for important documents. When I opened it, I caught a trace of perfume on the paper, something floral and heavy. My mother's scent, the same one she had worn since before I was born. Even through the mail, even after a day in transit, she found a way to be in the room. The check was a cashier's check, printed on heavy security paper, and it was made out to Haley Beckett in the amount of $250,000 from the joint account of Earl and Patricia Beckett. Underneath the check was a note in my mother's handwriting, the same looping cursive she used for Christmas cards. Haley, this is for your trouble. We know it's been a long time. Bring your son. Wear something nice. Don't make a scene. Mom, I read the note 3 times. For your trouble. She had called it my trouble. As if being pregnant at 16 and getting thrown out of my parents' house was a difficulty I had created for myself. Something that could be settled with a check and a note that ended with instructions about what to wear. There was nothing that said we are sorry. There was nothing that asked whether the child I had been carrying when they last saw me was alive. $250,000. I set the check on the table and stared at it. That amount would fund Hope Anchor for a full year. 20 girls who had been where I was at 16 would have a place to go. But bring your son. Bring a boy who had never drawn a breath, who had weighed 1 pound and 4 ounces, who had been born in a hospital room with only my high school English teacher holding my hand because I had no one else left. I set the check down next to the FedEx envelope. On the refrigerator behind me, held up by a magnet shaped like the state of North Carolina, was a photograph of Bree from the shelter, taken the day she smiled for the first time since arriving. I looked at the photograph, and then I looked at the check, and then I opened my laptop and searched for flights to Portland. The debate. I brought the entire FedEx envelope to June's house on Tuesday evening. She lived in a yellow bungalow about 15 minutes from my apartment, the kind of house that always smelled like Earl Grey and old books, and when I walked in, she already had 2 cups of tea on the kitchen table as if she had been expecting me. I set the check between the cups and sat down. June picked it up, read the amount, turned the check over, set it down, and then picked up the note. She read it slowly, the way she used to read student essays when she was looking for the sentence that revealed the real argument underneath the surface. Her hands were steady, but her jaw tightened. They think the boy is alive, she said. They never asked. 19 years. And they never once asked. And they want you to produce him. At a gala. Bring your son. Wear something nice. June put the note on the table and wrapped both hands around her tea. The tremor in her fingers was anger. The same anger I had seen in her when she showed up at the hospital the night I lost the baby, the night she held me while I asked the doctor to explain what I'm sorry meant because I did not understand that it meant my son was dead. She was 36 then, a woman who taught 10th grade English and had never held a dying newborn, and she held me anyway because there was nobody else. Earl Beckett is getting Family Man of the Year, June said, her voice very quiet, and he doesn't know if his grandchild is alive or dead. I told her about the shelter, about the funding gap, the 20 beds we could save, the girls who would have nowhere to go if Hope Anchor closed. I told her I could take the money and show up and smile for one evening and fly home and use every cent of it to keep the doors open. It would be one night of pretending in exchange for a year of real help for real people. That was a trade I could justify. June listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her cup down and looked at me for a long time, the way she looked at students who were smart enough to know the right answer but too scared to say it. I held you in that hospital, she said. You weighed less than the baby. You were 16 and alone, and you did everything you could, and it still was not enough because you were a child raising a child with no insurance and no family and no prenatal care. Whatever you decide, Haley, you do not owe them your silence. I drove home. I sat in my apartment with the check on the counter and the wooden box on the shelf and a question that had nothing to do with numbers. Could I stand in a ballroom and let my father accept an award for being a family man while I smiled and said nothing about the son he never knew he lost? I called Tara on Wednesday morning. I'll come. She started talking immediately, plans tumbling out of her in a rush of excitement and relief. Something about picking me up from the airport and having dinner and how the kids were so eager to meet their aunt. I let her talk for a while before I interrupted. But I need to see Mom and Dad first. Alone. Before the gala. She paused. Okay, she said, a little uncertain now. I can arrange that. After we hung up, I told myself I would give them one chance. If my father looked me in the eye and said he was sorry, if he said it simply and without qualification, without explaining why he had been right or reminding me that I had turned out fine, I would take the money and save the shelter and let the past stay buried. If he could not say those two words, then I would need to think about what I was actually willing to do. I looked at the wooden box on the shelf. I had not opened it. I had not moved it in years, but I walked across the room and picked it up, and the key around my neck swung forward and tapped against the brass lock with a small, clear sound, like a bell ringing once. I set the box in my suitcase, between a folded sweater and a pair of shoes I had not worn in a long time, and zipped it shut. Portland. 2 weeks passed. I worked. I sat with Bree while she filled out forms and left the boxes for parents' insurance blank the way I had at her age. On a Wednesday evening, I packed. The suitcase was already half ready. It had been sitting open at the foot of my bed since the night I put the wooden box inside. The box resting between a folded sweater and a pair of black heels I had not worn in 3 years. I added a black dress, a toothbrush, and a phone charger, and that was everything I owned that Portland required. The flight was 4.5 hours. Portland appeared through the clouds the way it always appeared, gray and wet and familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. I had not been back since I was 17. Tara was waiting at a coffee shop in the Pearl District. I saw her through the window before I walked in, and my legs nearly stopped because she looked so much like our mother. The same highlighted blonde hair, the same way of sitting with her smile already in place. But when she looked up and saw me, her eyes were different, wide and bright and completely unguarded. She hugged me. It was a real hug, tight and long, the kind that a person gives when they have been rehearsing it for years. We sat down. She ordered for both of us and pulled out her phone and started showing me photographs. Her husband Drew, their house, and then she swiped to a photo of a little girl with brown hair and a gap-toothed smile, standing on a porch in rain boots. That's my oldest, Tara said. She's 5. Her name is Haley. After you. The sound that came out of me was something between a laugh and a cough, and I covered it by taking a sip of the latte that had just arrived. My sister had named her daughter after me, after the sister she believed had walked away. I set the cup down and pressed both palms flat against the table because my hands were doing something I did not want Tara to see. Tara talked. She talked the way people talk when they have been storing up 19 years of conversation and finally have someone to pour it into. They lived 12 minutes from Mom and Dad. And then she said the thing that changed everything. "I was 11 when you left," she said, and her voice dropped half a register. Quieter now, the way a voice drops when it gets close to something it has been circling for a long time. "I woke up that Tuesday morning and your room was empty. Your closet was open and everything was gone. Mom said you wanted to be on your own. She said you were old enough to make your own choices. I put my hands in my lap. I always thought you just decided to go," Tara said. "That you had a plan, somewhere to stay, someone waiting for you. Mom made it sound like it was your idea." The words were right there in my throat. They sat there like stones, heavy and sharp, and all I had to do was open my mouth and let them fall. I was 16 and pregnant, and they packed my clothes in garbage bags and put me out the door before breakfast. Your mother helped. Your father would not look at me, but I looked at Tara's face, at the hope in it, the fragile architecture of a reunion she had been building in her head for almost 2 decades. If I said those words right now, in this coffee shop, between 2 cooling lattes, I would collapse that architecture with my bare hands, and there would be nothing underneath to catch her. "It was complicated," I said. Tara nodded, and I could see that she wanted to push but was afraid to. The way you are afraid to push on a door when you are not sure you want to see what is on the other side. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I brought you this," she said. "Dad's nomination letter, the one he wrote for the business council." I unfolded it. The letterhead was crisp, Cascade Mutual Insurance, and beneath it in 12-point Times New Roman was my father's voice, polished and precise and utterly convinced of its own sincerity. "Family has always been my compass. My 2 daughters, Haley and Tara, are my greatest achievement. I am proud to say that the values I instilled in them, resilience, independence, faith, have made them the women they are today." My hands shook. I held the paper tighter to stop it. Resilience, independence. He had taken the worst thing he ever did and repackaged it as a parenting philosophy. He kicked me out and called it independence. I survived and he called it resilience. The nomination letter was a trophy he had built from the wreckage of my adolescence, and 200 people were going to applaud him for it on Saturday night. "Isn't it beautiful?" Tara said. I refolded the letter along its creases and slid it into my jacket pocket. "It's something," I said. The next morning, I drove a rental car to the Beckett house on Maple Ridge Drive, the same split level with the brick front and the American flag by the garage. My mother opened the door. Cream blouse, pearl earrings, smile already assembled. She hugged me the way you hug someone you are performing for, light and quick, and started talking before I had taken off my coat. "How's the boy? What grade is he in?" I deflected every question and moved through the hallway into the living room, where the mantel held a row of framed photographs. I counted 8. Christmas dinners, beach vacations, Tara's graduation, Tara's wedding, Earl and Patricia and Tara, year after year. I was in none of them. My father came down the stairs. He shook my hand. The handshake was firm and brief, the handshake of a man closing a deal. He was wearing a pressed shirt and his silver watch and his thick gold wedding band, and he looked exactly the way he had always looked, only grayer. "Good to see you, Haley. Glad you're here." He reached into the pocket of his shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Here's what you'll say at the gala. Just stick to these. Don't go off script." I unfolded it, typed, single-spaced, with bullet points. "Thank Dad for his guidance. Introduce your son. Say a few words about how Dad inspired you to be resilient. Share a brief anecdote about family values, word by word, line by line." My entire role for Saturday evening scripted like a press release, as if I were a spokesperson rather than a daughter, as if the purpose of my being there was to deliver a statement and exit quietly. I folded the paper and put it in my back pocket. "Thank you," I said. The test. After lunch, which was sandwiches and small talk and Patricia filling every silence with questions about the boy, I asked to speak with my father alone. Patricia looked at Earl. Earl looked at me. "Of course," he said. "Let's go to my study." Patricia stood up. "I'll just come along and—" "Alone," I said. She sat back down. Her smile held, but her eyes went flat. The same expression I had seen on the faces of donors at Hope Anchor when I told them exactly how much money we needed, and they realized they were not getting out of the conversation cheaply. Earl's study was at the back of the house, a room I had never been allowed to enter as a child. The door was heavy oak and the walls were lined with shelves that held trophies and plaques and framed certificates and photographs of Earl shaking hands with people who looked important. A leather couch sat beneath the window, and a grandfather clock stood in the corner, ticking with a steady, measured patience that filled the room the way a heartbeat fills a body. The afternoon light came through the wooden blinds in stripes that fell across the carpet like bars. I sat in the chair across from his desk. I pressed my fingernails into my palms and felt the small crescent shapes they left, sharp enough to anchor me. "Before the gala," I said, "I need one thing from you." He leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. "Name it. An apology. For what you did when I was 16. The clock ticked. 3 times, 4 times, 5. My father's face did not change. It held the same expression it always held when someone presented him with a problem he considered already solved, a kind of patient tolerance, the face of a man who is about to explain something obvious. "Haley, your mother and I made a difficult decision. But look at you." He gestured with one hand, a casual sweep that took in my entire body as if it were Exhibit A. "You have a career. You have a life. You came here on your own 2 feet. You kicked me out. I was pregnant and you put my clothes in garbage bags. We gave you independence. You needed to grow up fast, and you did. I was 16, and you did grow up. That's my point. You turned out fine." The clock kept ticking. I listened to it for a moment because the sound was the only honest thing in the room. "Say you're sorry," I said. "I'm sorry it was hard." He folded his hands on the desk, the way he probably folded them in board meetings when delivering a concession that was designed to sound generous without costing anything. "But I'm not sorry for the decision. It worked. It worked. 2 words. To my father, kicking his pregnant 16-year-old daughter out of the house was a strategy that had produced measurable results. I was alive. I had a job. I had traveled across the country on my own money to sit in his study. The daughter survived. Therefore, the method was sound. "Besides," he said, "we've increased the amount. 300,000. We added 50 since the check. More money, same terms. In Earl Beckett's world, everything had a price." "I'll think about it," I said. I stood up. He stood up. We faced each other across the desk, and the grandfather clock ticked between us like a metronome, counting down to something neither of us could name. I walked to the door and stopped. The talking points were still in my back pocket. I did not hand them back. "Haley," my father said from behind me, "it's going to be a good evening. Everyone's looking forward to it." I walked down the hallway without answering. Patricia was in the kitchen, washing dishes she had already washed, and she did not look up as I passed. Tara had gone home to relieve the babysitter. The front door was where it had always been, and the flag by the garage was where it had always been, and the street was quiet in the way that streets in Portland suburbs are quiet on Friday afternoons when everyone is at work or pretending to be. I drove back to the hotel. The wooden box was in the closet, still in my suitcase, still locked. The check from my parents was in my wallet. The talking points were in my pocket, and somewhere in the back of my head, in the place where I had been keeping a door shut for 19 years, something was shifting. Because my father had given me exactly what I came for. He had given me his answer. And his answer was, it worked. I sat on the hotel bed and held the folded talking points in both hands. Thank Dad for his guidance. Introduce your son. Say a few words about how Dad inspired you. I put the paper on the nightstand. I did not throw it away. I was going to need it. I had been back in the hotel room for less than 2 hours when I walked down to the lobby for coffee and found my mother sitting at the bar. Patricia Beckett was on a high stool with a glass of white wine, positioned the way a woman positions herself when she has been waiting and wants you to know it. She was still wearing the cream blouse from this afternoon. She did not look surprised to see me. Sit down, Haley. I sat. I know you don't have a son, my mother said. I've known for years, she said. Her voice was steady, measured, and completely under control. I searched the Oregon Vital Records database. You can look up birth and death certificates online for $4. $4, and I found it. Baby boy Beckett. 1 pound, 4 ounces, $4. My mother had paid $4 to learn that her grandson was dead, and then she had put that information in the same place she put everything else that threatened the life she had built. Behind a locked door, in a room she never entered, in a house where every photograph on the mantel started from the year I vanished. And you never told Dad, I said. What would that have accomplished? He'd made peace with it. We both had. You made peace with a version where I chose to leave and my baby is alive. You found the death certificate and you still said nothing. I kept the family together, Patricia said, and she picked up her wine glass and took a sip that was too small to be about the wine. That's all that matters now. If you go up there tomorrow and say whatever you're planning to say, Patricia said, you will destroy your sister. Tara worships your father. She has built her entire life 12 minutes from our house. Her children play in our yard every Sunday. She named her daughter after you, Haley. After you, because she believes you were brave enough to leave on your own terms. Patricia set the glass down and folded her hands on the bar. The same gesture Earl had made in his study that afternoon. The same folded hands. The same controlled posture. You want to take that from her? You want to stand in front of 200 people and tear apart the only version of this family that your sister has ever known? I had spent the drive back to the hotel thinking about my father, about justice and exposure and the satisfaction of watching him lose the award. I had not been thinking about Tara. If I stood on that stage, I would not only expose Earl Beckett, I would demolish the foundation of Tara's childhood, her relationship with parents who lived 12 minutes away and watched her children on Sundays. The truth would land on everyone in the blast radius, and Tara was standing closest to the center. Take the money, Patricia said. Go home. Build your shelter. Let your sister keep her family. She paused. That's the kind thing to do. The kind thing. My mother had taken silence and dressed it up as compassion, and the worst part was that she was not entirely wrong. I looked at my mother. She looked back at me with the same calm expression she had worn the morning she set 2 garbage bags by the front door. Good night, Mom, I said. I went back to my room. I sat on the bed. The talking points were on the nightstand where I had left them. The wooden box was in the suitcase in the closet. The check was in my wallet, and my mother's words were everywhere, filling the room like a gas I could not see but could feel pressing against the inside of my chest. Let your sister keep her family. 40 minutes later, Tara knocked on the door. She was holding a brown paper bag in one hand and a bottle of red wine in the other, and she was smiling the way she had been smiling all day. The bright and slightly desperate smile of a woman who has gotten something she wanted for a very long time and is terrified it will be taken away before she can finish enjoying it. Girls' night before the big day, she said. The bag was Thai food. The hotel room filled with the smell of lemongrass and basil. Tara kicked off her shoes and sat cross-legged on the second bed and opened the containers between us as if we were teenagers sharing a meal, as if the last 19 years had not happened. She talked. She showed me photos of the kids. She laughed about the new dress she bought for tomorrow. And then she set down her spring roll and wiped her hands on a napkin and looked at me in a way that was different from how she had been looking at me all evening. Haley, can I ask you something? Sure. When you left, she stopped, started again. Was it because of me? The room got very still. The air conditioner hummed in its cycle, on and off, and outside the window, the parking lot lights cast an orange glow through the gap in the curtains that flickered every time a car passed on the street below. "What?" I said, though I had heard her perfectly. I was 11. I thought maybe I did something, like maybe I was annoying or too loud or I used your stuff without asking. I used to borrow your hair clips and I never put them back. She was looking at her hands now, picking at the edge of a napkin, tearing it into small, precise strips the way people do when they are saying something they have been holding for so long that the words feel like they belong to someone else. I spent years thinking that. I'd lie in bed and go over every time I was mean to you or every time I tattled or didn't share, and I'd think, that's why. That's the reason she left. 30 years old, married, 2 children, a career, a home 12 minutes from our parents, and she had been lying in bed at night cataloging the sins of an 11-year-old girl, searching for the one that had been terrible enough to make her sister disappear. The words were in my throat again, the same stones I had swallowed at the coffee shop. I did not leave. They threw me out. Mom packed the bags. Dad would not look at me. You were asleep and they did it before you woke up, and then they told you a story that was easier to live with than the truth. But I looked at Tara's face and I saw what saying those words in this room would do. It would fall on her like a building. She would be sitting on a hotel bed, surrounded by cold Thai food and an open bottle of wine, alone with the wreckage of every memory she had ever built about her family, and I would be the one who swung the wrecking ball. If I was going to break her world, I owed her more than a hotel room confession between bites of pad see ew. I owed her a choice about when and how she heard it, and if I said it at the gala tomorrow, in front of 200 people, she would not even get that. There was no clean option. Silence kept Tara safe inside a lie. Speaking freed her from a false guilt and trapped her in a real betrayal. Every door in this room led to a room that was worse than the one I was in. "It was never because of you, Tara," I said. "I need you to know that. It was never you." She started crying. She put her face in her hands and her shoulders shook, and the napkin she had been tearing fell to the comforter in a scatter of white strips. Then she stood up and crossed the space between the beds and hugged me. Hard, the way she had hugged me at the coffee shop, but more, with 19 years of relief pouring out of her in a single gesture. "I'm so glad you're back," she whispered. I held my sister. I wrapped my arms around her and pressed my chin against the top of her head and stared at the ceiling, and kept my eyes open because if I closed them, I was going to break. And if I broke right now, everything I had been holding would come spilling out and I would not be able to stop it. My eyes stayed dry. The ceiling was white and featureless and held nothing but a smoke detector and a sprinkler head and the faint brown ring of a water stain from a leak that someone had fixed but not painted over. Tara left around 11. She hugged me at the door and said she would see me tomorrow and that she was glad, so glad, that we were a family again. I closed the door. I locked it. I stood with my back against it and let my body slide down until I was sitting on the carpet with my knees pulled up and my forehead against my arms. The Thai food containers were still open on the bed. The wine bottle was half full. The room smelled like lemongrass and basil, and something underneath those smells that was just hotel, just recirculated air and industrial carpet, and the particular loneliness of a room that was never meant to be anyone's home. I did not sleep. I lay on the bed with the lights off and the curtains open, watching the orange flicker of the parking lot lamps through the gap in the fabric. The air conditioning cycled on and off in intervals that were almost regular but not quite, a rhythm that promised consistency and then broke its own promise every few minutes, and the sound of it filled the silence the way water fills a glass, slowly and completely, and with nowhere to go. At 2 a.m, Portland time, which was 5 a.m. in Asheville, I got up and opened the closet. The suitcase was where I had left it, standing upright on the luggage rack. I unzipped it and lifted the folded sweater, and there was the wooden box, the same box that had sat on my bookshelf for years between a copy of What to Expect and a collection of Mary Oliver poems. I pulled the silver chain over my head and held the key between my thumb and forefinger and fitted into the brass lock and turned it. The lid opened. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. I had not touched it in almost 3 years, but the creases were soft and deep from the hundreds of times I had folded and unfolded it before that. The hundreds of nights I had taken it out and read it and put it back and locked the box and told myself I was doing this to remember when the truth was that I was doing it to punish myself. I unfolded it. The paper was heavier than regular paper, the kind of stock that government offices use for documents that are meant to last. State of Oregon, certificate of death, name, baby boy Beckett, sex, male, date of death, same as date of birth, weight, 1 pound, 4 ounces, mother, Haley Beckett, age 16, father, unknown. There was a line for the baby's first name and it was blank. I had never filled it in. The nurses asked if I had a name picked out, and I said I did not know, and then there was a form and a social worker and a conversation I could not follow because the room kept going white at the edges, and by the time I could think clearly again, the certificate had been filed and the blank space had become permanent. My son had lived and died without a name because I was 16 years old and alone in a hospital, and nobody had told me that naming him was something I was allowed to do. I had carried this piece of paper for 19 years. I had carried it the way a defendant carries a confession, as evidence of something I had done wrong, proof that I had failed at the one thing that was supposed to be instinctive and natural and automatic. If I had been stronger, if I had eaten better, if I had found a doctor sooner, if June's couch had been closer to a hospital, if my parents had kept me, if anyone had helped. Each if was a blade, and I had been cutting myself with them for 19 years, one careful incision at a time, and the scars were so old now that I could not tell them apart from the rest of me. I picked up my phone and called June. She answered on the second ring. 5 a.m. in Asheville, and she answered on the second ring, which meant she had been sleeping with the phone on her pillow, which meant she had been waiting for this call the way she had been waiting for every call I had made from Portland, alert and ready and unwilling to let me reach out and find no one there. Because June had promised herself, 20 years ago, that she would never again let me reach for help and find empty air. I've been carrying this certificate like proof of what I did wrong, I said. Silence. The kind of silence that is not absence but attention. The silence of a person who is listening so hard that even breathing feels like an interruption. It's not proof of what you did wrong, Haley. June's voice was rough with sleep, but steady underneath it. The voice of a woman who had been saying variations of this sentence for 19 years and had not once gotten tired of it. It's proof of what they did. You were 16. You had no prenatal care because you had no insurance, because you had no parents, because they put your clothes in garbage bags and set them by the front door. I could have. You could have nothing. You were a child. The adults in your life failed you. That baby died because a 16-year-old girl was sleeping on her teacher's couch and could not afford to see a doctor. That is not your failure. That was never your failure. I held the phone against my ear and stared at the death certificate on the hotel bed, and something inside my chest cracked. Not broke. Cracked. The way ice cracks in spring when the water underneath begins to move again. For 19 years I had been holding this piece of paper like a verdict. Guilty. Guilty of being young, of being poor, of being alone, of not being enough. And June's voice in the dark at 5 a.m. was not telling me anything new. She had said these words before, in different combinations, at different hours, over different cups of tea. But this was the first time I heard them while I was holding the certificate in my hands and staring at the blank line where my son's name should have been. And this was the first time I was in Portland, 3 miles from the hospital where it happened. And this was the night before I was going to stand in a room with the 2 people who had caused it. Something shifted. The weight on my chest did not disappear, but it moved, the way a stone moves when you push it to the edge of a table. This was not about the shelter anymore. This was about saying the words out loud, in a room, to people, and hearing my own voice say the thing that had been lodged in my throat since I was 16 years old. It was not my fault. It was never my fault. Whatever you do tomorrow, June said, do it for the girl who was 16. Do it for her. I put the phone down. I looked at the death certificate. I did not fold it. I did not put it back in the box. I set it on the nightstand next to the talking points my father had given me, 2 pieces of paper side by side, one that told the truth and one that told a lie, and I left them both there and lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. When I opened them, it was Saturday. I put on the black dress, low heels, the silver chain with the key, though the box was empty now and the key had nothing left to lock. I picked up the death certificate from the nightstand and folded it once and slid it into my wallet. Then I picked up the talking points and folded them and put them in the pocket of my coat. Then I looked at the cashier's check, $250,000, still in my wallet from the day I arrived. I left it there, next to the death certificate, 2 pieces of paper in the same wallet. One had been carried for 19 years, the other for 3 weeks. They weighed the same. The taxi took 12 minutes. The Portland Hilton ballroom was on the 2nd floor, and when the elevator doors opened, I could hear the murmur of 200 people talking, and the clink of glasses, and the low thrum of a jazz quartet playing standards in the corner. White tablecloths, white flowers, candles and glass holders, a banner across the back wall that said the same thing it had said in the flash forward that opened this story. The words I had been reading in my sleep for 3 weeks. Family Man of the Year, Earl Beckett. I found the family table at the front of the room. My father was already seated at the head, wearing a charcoal suit and a blue tie and the silver watch and the gold ring. My mother was beside him in the emerald green dress I had seen hanging in her closet that morning, her smile assembled and operational. Tara sat next to Patricia, wearing the navy blue dress Drew had complimented, and Drew was beside her, a quiet man with kind eyes who shook my hand and said it was good to finally meet me. Next to my chair was an empty seat, a place setting for one, untouched, the water glass full, the napkin folded into a shape that was supposed to look like a swan. The chair for the boy. I sat down. My father leaned across the table and winked at me. Just stick to the script, he said. I touched the pocket of my coat where the talking points were folded. I touched the wallet in my purse where the death certificate and the check sat side by side. Of course, Dad, I said. Dinner lasted an hour and a half. I ate something I could not name. My father moved between tables, shaking hands and calling men by their first names. Patricia fielded questions about the empty chair beside me. Oh, the boy couldn't make it. School. The women across the table nodded. Tara sat to my left. She reached under the table at one point and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. She looked happy in a way that made something inside me ache, the happiness of a person who does not yet know what is coming. The business council president took the stage and introduced my father. The room applauded, and Earl Beckett stood from the table and buttoned his charcoal suit jacket and walked to the podium the way he walked everywhere, with the measured stride of a man who believed the room had been waiting for him. His speech was 7 minutes long. He talked about family values, about being present for the people you love. He mentioned his wife Patricia, his rock. He mentioned his daughters, Haley and Tara, remarkable women. He mentioned resilience and independence and faith, the same words from the nomination letter in my jacket pocket. I'm a lucky man, my father said. I have a family that shows up for each other, and tonight all 3 of my girls are here. 200 people applauded, standing ovation. My mother stood first, clapping with her hands near her face, the way women clap in church. Tara stood next. Drew, the tables around us. The whole room was on its feet. Then my father said the words. And now, I'd like to invite my eldest daughter, Haley, to say a few words. She's come all the way from North Carolina to be here tonight. The applause shifted toward me. I pushed back from the table. The legs of the chair scraped against the ballroom floor. I stood up and walked to the podium, the low heels clicking on the hardwood, the spotlight warm on my face. My father stepped aside. As I passed him, he touched my shoulder and whispered, "Just the bullet points, sweetheart." I took the mic off the stand. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the talking points. I unfolded the paper and held it up so the room could see it. A single sheet, typed, single-spaced. "This is what I was asked to say tonight," I said. I read it aloud, word for word. "Thank my father for his guidance. Introduce my son. Say a few words about how Dad inspired me to be resilient and independent." I folded the paper and set it on the podium. "Here's what actually happened." My father's smile held. It was still in place, the wide and warm one, the one that crinkled his eyes. But something behind it shifted, the way the foundation of a house shifts before the crack appears in the wall. "When I was 16, I got pregnant," I said. "My parents put my clothes in 2 garbage bags. My mother set them by the front door before I woke up." My father did not look at me when I walked past him in the hallway. The room changed. I could feel it the way you feel weather change. A pressure drop, a collective drawing in of breath. Some faces were confused, eyebrows pulling together, heads tilting. Others were very still, the kind of still that comes from recognition, from hearing something that sounds familiar, even when you have never heard it before. My father's smile was still there, but it had frozen, the muscles holding it in place like scaffolding around a structure that was no longer sound. My mother reached for her water glass. Her hand missed it on the first try. "A teacher took me in," I said. "I slept in her spare bedroom. I could not afford a doctor. I worked at a gas station until I could not stand long enough to work the register. You asked me to bring my son tonight. You offered me $250,000 to bring him and sit at this table and pretend we are a happy family." I looked at my father. He looked at me. The grandfather clock in his study was 3 miles away, but I could hear it ticking. Or maybe that was just my pulse, steady and slow, slower than I expected, the heartbeat of a person who has already made her decision and is simply seeing it through. "I don't have a son." The silence that followed was not the absence of sound. It was the sound of 200 people stopping at exactly the same time, forks pausing between plate and mouth, hands freezing around wine stems, conversations dying mid-syllable. Somewhere at the back of the room, a fork slipped from someone's fingers and hit the edge of a plate with a clear, high note that rang once and then stopped, as if even the silverware understood that this was not the moment. "He was stillborn," I said. 1 pound, 4 ounces. I was 16 years old and alone in a hospital room, and I did not know that you could name a baby who never opened his eyes. I reached into my purse and took out the death certificate. I held it up, folded, the old paper soft and yellowed at the edges, the same piece of paper I had locked in a wooden box for 19 years, the same piece of paper I had opened at 2 in the morning on June's voice, and left on the nightstand next to my father's talking points. "This is the only proof he existed," I said. "I have carried it for 19 years. I reached into my jacket pocket and unfolded the nomination letter, the one Tara had given me at the coffee shop, the one with the Cascade Mutual letterhead and the 12-point Times New Roman. My father wrote in his nomination letter, "My 2 daughters are my greatest achievement. Family is everything." I looked at Earl. "You did not call, not once, not in 19 years. You did not know if I had a boy or a girl. You did not know he died. You did not know if I was alive." My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in 65 years, Earl Beckett was in a room full of people and had no talking points and no script and no way to reframe what was happening into a story where he was the hero. He sat with his mouth open and his hands flat on the table, and the charcoal suit and the blue tie and the silver watch and the gold ring, and all of it meant nothing, all the polish and the performance and the 40 years of boardroom confidence, because 200 people were looking at him and seeing, for the first time, the man behind the banner. I lowered the papers. I held the mic with both hands and said the thing I had come 3,000 miles to say, the thing I had whispered to June at 5 in the morning, the thing I had been trying to say for 19 years. I spent 19 years thinking it was my fault, I said, that if I had been stronger, if I had had money, if someone had helped me, he would be alive. I built a shelter for teenage mothers because I could not go back in time and save myself. I paused. The room was so quiet I could hear the candles burning. It was not my fault, I said. It was never my fault. I set the mic on the podium. I did not drop it. I placed it down the way you place something fragile on a shelf, gently and with both hands, because I was done holding it, and I was done holding everything it represented. My mother was crying. Her mascara was running in 2 thin lines down her cheeks, and her hands were pressed flat against the table, and the tears were rolling freely, but the tears were not for me, and they were not for the baby. They were for the emerald green dress and the pearl earrings and the 200 people who were watching her, and they were for the story she had spent 19 years protecting, the story that was dissolving in real time under the ballroom lights. I walked back to the table. I picked up my purse. I opened my wallet and took out the cashier's check, $250,000, and I laid it face down on the white tablecloth next to the untouched place setting with the full water glass and the napkin folded into a swan, the seat that had been meant for a boy who never breathed. Then I walked out of the ballroom. The lobby was cool after the heat of the spotlight. My heels clicked on the marble floor and the sound echoed in the open space the way footsteps echo in places that are too large for one person. The doorman nodded as I passed. He did not know what had happened upstairs. He was just a man in a uniform doing his job, and I was just a woman in a black dress walking through a lobby, and sometimes the biggest moments of your life look exactly like nothing to the people standing next to you. I was halfway across the lobby when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, uneven, the sound of someone walking fast in heels they had not practiced in. I stopped. Is it true? I turned around. Tara was standing 10 feet behind me. Her navy blue dress was wrinkled where she had been gripping the fabric in her lap, and her mascara had run the same way Patricia's had run. But on Tara's face it looked different because the tears were different. These tears were the tears of a woman whose entire childhood had just been rewritten in front of her. "They kicked you out?" she said. "Yes. They told me you left. They told me you wanted to go. I know. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me?" "You were 11, Tara. I'm not 11 anymore." We stood there in the lobby with the marble floor between us and the muffled sound of the ballroom leaking through the closed doors above, 200 people processing what they had just heard, and below them 2 sisters who were processing something older and deeper and harder. "I named my daughter after you," Tara said. Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence, broke clean in half the way a branch breaks when the weight on it finally exceeds what it can hold. "I named her after you because I thought you were brave enough to leave on your own. But you didn't leave. She could not finish. Don't leave Portland yet," Tara said. "I wasn't going to. I need to hear everything. All of it. Everything that happened after that morning. Okay, just not tonight. Okay." Tara turned and walked toward the lobby restroom. She did not go back to the ballroom. She was going to need more than a night. But she had asked, and that was the beginning of something. I walked out through the front doors and into the parking lot. Portland, at night, the rain hung in the air like a curtain, settling on my face and my coat in a thin layer of cold. The rental car was in the 3rd row. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from June. "How did it go?" I typed back. I said it. 3 dots. Then, "All of it?" "All of it." A pause. Then, "Good. Come home." I got in the car and set my purse on the passenger seat. The wallet was open from when I had taken out the check, and I could see the death certificate inside, folded once, resting against the leather. For 19 years I had kept that piece of paper in a locked box on a shelf in my apartment, behind a brass lock, behind a key I wore on a chain around my neck, hidden and sealed and guarded as if it were something dangerous, something that would destroy me if it got out. And now it was lying in an open wallet on the seat of a rental car in a parking lot in Portland, Oregon, next to a tube of chapstick and a gas station receipt. And it was just a piece of paper. It was just a record of something that had happened to a girl who had done everything she could. I started the car. Through the windshield, I could see the Hilton entrance, the warm light spilling out through the lobby doors. Somewhere on the second floor, my father was sitting at a table with a banner behind him, and for the first time in his life he had nothing to say. Somewhere off the lobby, my sister was standing at a sink, beginning the slow work of understanding that the family she thought she had was built on a story that had never been true. And somewhere in Asheville, in a yellow bungalow that smelled like Earl Grey and old books, June was sitting in her kitchen with the lights on, waiting for me to come home. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove south. The city thinned out around me, the buildings giving way to highway, and the highway stretched ahead in a long, dark line toward a small apartment in Asheville, where a bookshelf held a space between two books where a wooden box used to be. The box was in the suitcase in the trunk. It was empty. The key was around my neck, and the piece of paper that had lived inside that box for 19 years was lying open in my wallet on the passenger seat, ordinary and small and free.